It was supposed to be another predictable oversight, hearing another day of political theater. Donald Trump walked into the Judiciary Committee chamber with his usual rhythm of dominance. His stride was deliberate, his red tie slightly askew in that familiar way that screamed control without apology. Cameras flashed. Reporters took their positions. The hearing room stirred with the same anticipation reserved for scandals that never quite land. Trump gave a half smile to the cameras and adjusted the Rolex on his wrist. He didn't need to speak. His presence spoke for him. He had weathered congressional hearings before, and to his mind, this would be no different. Another opportunity to recite slogans, twist narratives, and remind America who still held the mic. Jasmine Crockett sat 3 seats away from center, almost invisible in the moment. She didn't shift in her chair or glance at the press pit. Her eyes didn't follow the man in the room. Instead, they fixed quietly on a manila folder in front of her, her fingers gently tracing the edges, like someone rehearsing a truth too heavy to speak just yet. From across the aisle, no one noticed her breathing tighten. The gavel echoed. The chairman opened with procedural formalities, then launched straight into the agenda, continued questioning on refugee policy, specifically the administration's post-9/11 handling of expedited removals and discretionary denials. Nothing new, just another chapter in the long, unending book of partisan deadlock. But then it came. A single line, almost nothing. A junior congresswoman asked if the White House ever directly intervened in Department of Homeland Security recommendations for child asylum claims from the Caribbean. Trump scoffed, rolled his eyes, and said, "I don't remember ever caring about Haiti one way or another. What's your point?" The room chuckled. Even a few reporters laughed not because it was funny, but because it was classic. It was Trump being Trump. A flippant comment, a swipe of dismissal, a shrug. They expected it. He expected it. But Jasmine didn't laugh. She simply made a note. It wasn't the comment itself that stayed with her. It was the way no one flinched, as if the suffering of children in Port-au-Prince or Gonaives didn't warrant more than a joke. As if the lives that were once in his hands quietly pushed aside had never really been human in the room's memory. That was the moment it shifted. Quietly, invisibly. The night before, Jasmine had reviewed the packet again, its spine thick with time. It had taken her nearly 9 months to trace it. A denied FOIA request, a subpoena extension, a long-forgotten personnel record, signed in blue ink and sealed with dust from 2007. Most of the country never remembered the Bush-era remnants that leaked into early 2007 policy reviews, especially those carried over by holdover staffers during Trump's early days of political positioning. But she remembered, because somewhere buried in those records was a list, not long, just 7 names. 7 Haitian children, all denied humanitarian parole, all processed through expedited removal, and all gone within 6 months of returnsome to orphanages burned in political uprisings. Others simply vanished. One of them, according to a DHS whistleblower who had reached out to Jasmine in the early months of her investigation, had a case file with a single-line rejection memo attached. Not from a career immigration officer, not even from a senior DHS official, but from the office of the president. Signed, initialed, marked as not conducive to demographic stability. That phrase, not conducive to demographic stability. It haunted her. She didn't bring it up right away. No one would have listened yet. It would have been labeled too thin, too speculative. And besides, Trump would simply deny it, accuse her of inventing controversy. And the room would laugh again. No, she had to wait. The wound wasn't deep enough. Not yet. Now, in the Judiciary Committee hearing room, the dynamic remained familiar. Trump dominated with performance. Committee members rotated in with predictable cadence. They brought up the Mueller report, border walls, classified document controversies. He parried with sarcasm, talked over the chair, called the entire hearing a joke, and then turned to wave at his favorite camera. This was routine to him. To the country, it was all noise. To Jasmine, it was a lullaby. A rhythm she could calculate. And beneath that rhythm, a silence was growing. Behind her calm posture, she was rerunning the chain of custody for a single envelope she had retrieved 4 nights ago from a locked federal archive in Alexandria. It wasn't labeled dramatically, just a coded memo number, but it contained something that had never reached sunlight: an interagency communication dated January 12, 2007. It cross-referenced refugee screening with executive office directives specifically, one directive marked with Trump's name. At the time, he wasn't even a candidate, but he was funding research, building talking points. And somewhere, somehow, someone had slipped him access to shape immigration posture under a different administration's shadow. And in the corner of that memo, one name had been circled in red. A child, Danica Pierre, age 7. Returned to Haiti in March. Died in August. Malaria, malnourishment. Jasmine had stared at the name so long, she could no longer read it without blinking back something more than anger. Back in the chamber, Trump leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. He was coasting. His defenders were running out the clock with time-wasting questions. His lawyers whispered confidently behind him. And then Jasmine glanced up, not at him, at the screen behind the chairman's bench. Still blank, but not for long. She didn't speak. She didn't interrupt. All she did was quietly place one folder beside her microphone. She tapped it once, gently, then placed her fingertips together and waited. Not with confrontation, not with theater, but with certainty. She knew what was inside. And she knew the room wasn't ready. But it would be. By the time the committee recessed for lunch, Jasmine hadn't said a single word. She didn't need to. In Washington, silence can speak volume, especially when it comes from someone who usually waits her turn not out of deference, but because she knows something others don't. The reporters didn't notice her folder. Not yet. They were still caught up in Trump's rhetorical loop jabs at radical Democrats, nods to his base, the usual crowd-pleasing noise that kept headlines churning but meaning stagnant. But behind Jasmine's still posture, a quiet current had begun. A shift not loud enough to register on C-SPAN, but real enough to be felt by anyone paying attention. And that's what Jasmine did. She paid attention. Months earlier, the investigation hadn't even started with Trump. It had started with a name she didn't recognize: Marcus Belafonte, a low-level immigration clerk who had vanished from DHS records in 2008. No termination file, no resignation letter, just gone. His widow, a woman in her 60s, had come into Jasmine's Dallas district office unannounced. She wore a faded gray cardigan and clutched a yellowed folder like it held something that might burn her fingers if opened too fast. "He said if anything ever happened," she whispered, "I should find someone who still remembers why truth matters." Inside was a single photocopied memo, barely legible. The DHS stamp was smudged, but the subject line was clear. Executive influence on Tier 3, refugee adjudication, Caribbean sector. It meant nothing to Jasmine at first. But 2 days later, a former immigration attorney called her back from a number she didn't recognize. "You're looking into the wrong era," he told her. "This didn't start when Trump became president. It started when he started practicing power." What followed was 9 months of digging through layers of bureaucracy built to forget. Everything was intentionally ordinary: delays, closed archives, denied FOIA requests. Jasmine learned to read between redactions. Every time she came close to a connection, the file would suddenly become unavailable due to reclassification. She'd seen that before, usually when someone powerful had something buried deep enough to require official silence. But there were cracks. A fax log from 2007. An archived voicemail from a regional field office. An unedited file note from a junior analyst in Miami. They all led back to a short memo chain marked Demographic Integrity Consideration, White House initiated. It didn't name Trump directly, but it didn't have to. The internal routing code was the same one used by the Office of Strategic Policy Initiatives a shadow advisory cell Trump had helped fund while positioning himself as a non-official political actor during the waning years of the Bush administration. That cell had one focus: shaping immigration through demographic modeling. Demographic modeling, Jasmine repeated to herself one night, the words tasting sterile on her tongue. But behind those two words were real real decisions, made by people who never had to see the consequences of a checkmark in a margin. That's what haunted her. Back in the hearing room, Jasmine barely moved. She kept her hands folded, her gaze steady. From the outside, she looked bored, but inside, her mind was tracking every detail. She watched Trump more carefully than anyone. He was enjoying himself, deflecting, interrupting, laughing at the chair. It was a show, a role he had mastered. But Jasmine didn't see the show. She saw the notes his staff passed behind the table, the way his eyes darted toward the press pool when certain names were mentioned, the subtle tightening of his jaw when someone said the word refugee. He was still performing, but something in him sensed it wasn't landing like it used to. And he was right. Because this time, Jasmine wasn't trying to win the moment. She was preparing to reveal the record. 2 nights before the hearing, she sat in her apartment, surrounded by folders, color-coded, marked with dates and districts. She didn't need to reread them. She already knew every document by heart. She'd built timelines that stretched across 3 presidencies. She'd traced metadata on internal memos, reviewed flight logs, compared signature patterns, and matched them with known staff assignments. One envelope sat unopened. Inside, an official reply from the Office of Inspector General, stamped and sealed. It confirmed what she suspected. One of the discretionary refugee denials from 2007 had bypassed standard review channels, altogether signed off through an executive advisory override. The memo bore 3 sets of initials. One of them matched Trump's handwriting from a real estate transfer she'd subpoenaed from 1,989 an odd parallel. But handwriting doesn't lie. She wasn't out for spectacle. That wasn't her style. When she'd been a public defender, she'd learned that real justice doesn't come with fanfare. It comes from patience, from knowing exactly when to speak and when to wait. She still remembered her first trial. Her client was 15, accused of aggravated theft. No priors, no lawyer. The state offered him a deal 19 months in juvie. He was ready to take it, but Jasmine dug one layer deeper. Discovered the clerk who recorded the store video had mislabeled the timestamp. It placed him at the scene after the theft occurred. One detail, one contradiction, one truth. She won that case, not by yelling, but by seeing what others didn't. And now she sat in a marble-paneled chamber, watching history loop around her. Another man, older, richer, surrounded by defenders, but still hiding behind paperwork. This time, she would be the contradiction. She thought about Danica again. The 7-year-old from Cap Haitien. All she had was a photograph from the Red Cross barefoot, standing in ankle-deep floodwater, eyes too old for her face. The medical log said she died of complications from dengue fever. But the internal DHS file said she'd been denied re-entry due to demographic dilution concern. She underlined those 3 words so hard, her pen tore the page. When the committee reconvened after lunch, the air felt thicker. Some of the press pool had started whispering. A few had noticed the folder on Jasmine's desk now had a red tab protruding. A producer from C-SPAN whispered to a camera op, "Focus on her if she moves. Something's off today." Trump returned with the same confidence. He straightened his cuffs. His voice was louder. He called the hearings stupid, blamed the deep state. He said what he always said. But Jasmine didn't respond. Not yet. She wasn't ready to break the silence. Not until the room forgot how to dismiss her. And they were almost there. The hearing resumed at precisely 1:47 p.m. The committee chairman tapped his gavel once, with the efficiency of someone trying to stay ahead of an afternoon that was already sliding out of predictability. Members filtered back to their seats, sipping from disposable coffee cups and flipping through notes they'd barely skimmed. The ambient buzz returned legal assistants whispering, press-tapping keyboards, C-SPAN adjusting focus. Trump was already seated, arms crossed, waiting. He looked comfortable, too comfortable. Jasmine hadn't spoken all morning. She hadn't even cleared her throat. But when her name was called by the chairman, Congresswoman Crockett, you're recognized for 5 minutes. The room didn't just quiet. It paused. There was something about the stillness in her posture, something unshifting, something that didn't match the noise of politics. Even the camera operator in the upper mezzanine leaned in closer, instinctively centering her in frame. Jasmine reached down and slowly opened the red-tabbed folder. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she laid out 3 documents in a neat horizontal row before her, color-coded, seals visible, signatures facing upward, and then only then did she look up. Her voice was calm, clear, no theatrics, no raised eyebrow, no fire. Mr. Trump, I want to ask you about a policy memorandum dated January 12, 2007, marked DHS EX 314B. Are you familiar with that document? Trump smirked, immediately brushing it off. Congresswoman, I wasn't even in politics back then, so unless you're trying to read old parking tickets, I'm not sure what you're fishing for. There it was, that tone, that condescension polished by decades of dismissing women in hearings, journalists in press pools, even judges on federal benches. It had worked for him, every time. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Respectfully, sir, she said, eyes never leaving him. You were, at that time, the founder and financial sponsor of the American Demographic Research Council, a private advisory group that submitted white papers to DHS and ICE under the name of Strategic Policy Initiatives. Your name appears on no fewer than 9 interdepartmental correspondences between January and June of that year. Trump blinked. The smirk softened. A beat of silence passed, not long enough to make headlines, but just long enough for the most senior journalist in the room to jot down 2 words. He hesitated. Trump leaned forward. I don't recall that name. Sounds like another one of your deep state inventions. Jasmine nodded once, as if she'd expected that. She slid the first document forward. This is a funding invoice dated March 2, 2007. It records a $500,000 transfer from a real estate holding company, TRM Atlantic Properties, headquartered in Manhattan, to the Strategic Policy Initiatives account. The authorized signatory for TRM Atlantic is Donald J. Trump. She let the name hang in the air like humidity. And this document, she continued, tapping the second sheet, is a receipt of that memo, DHS EX 314B. It includes an executive override signature, initials DJT. Trump shifted slightly in his seat. His counsel leaned toward him, whispering something quickly. He waved them off. So what if I funded some research? That's called being involved. That's called caring about this country. You want to prosecute that? The room bristled, but Jasmine remained still. No, sir, she replied evenly. I don't want to prosecute that. I want to understand it. She opened the third document. It was different, photocopied, grainy, a fax header across the top. DHS SFEL Regional Ops. This is a copy of a refugee case summary dated April 8, 2007. The subject, Danica Pierre, Haitian minor, age 7, application, humanitarian parole, recommendation, approve. She paused. Override decision, denied. Reason cited, demographic dilution not aligned with long-term national modeling. Source of directive, White House Advisory Input, Office of Strategic Policy Initiatives. A single cough echoed in the room, then nothing. Trump tried to laugh. Are you seriously bringing up one refugee case from 20 years ago? One? You don't think our resources are better spent on border security today? But his voice had changed. It was louder, yes, but thinner. The volume was a mask, the echo of control. Jasmine spoke again, softer now. Mr. Trump, this committee isn't reviewing border security policy. We're reviewing ethical accountability in executive directives. You personally initialed a denial that reversed a career DHS recommendation for humanitarian relief to a child. She let that land. Danica Pierre was 7. She died 4 months later from preventable illness in a camp where she was returned. The silence was sudden and sharp. It came not just from the room, but from every television monitor broadcasting the hearing. A few members of the committee shifted uncomfortably. Some didn't know this was coming. Trump leaned forward. His voice dropped a register. Look, no president reviews every immigration case. We have people, agencies, processes. Jasmine tilted her head, not with judgment, but with precision. And yet this one reached your desk. She turned to the screen behind her. Mr. Chairman, I request to display Exhibit 8. The screen lit up. A scanned page from a DHS administrative memo appeared highlighted in yellow. It read, "The denial for case 21,406, Pierre D., was submitted with override initials DJT, authorized by SPI advisory input. Directive was communicated via private channel at request of external consultant." The camera zoomed in on Trump's face. He wasn't smiling anymore. In the gallery, a reporter whispered into her mic, "This isn't about documents anymore. This is about legacy." Trump cleared his throat. "You're reaching. None of this is criminal. It's all cherry-picked." Jasmine nodded, not dismissively but deliberately. "You're right, Mr. Trump. It's not criminal. It's not even about legality." She turned to the panel. "It's about whether a child's life was ever considered more than a demographic variable." That sentence settled across the room like dust. No one moved. Even his counsel stopped scribbling. Even the marble column silent and unchanging seemed to absorb the weight of it. Trump opened his mouth, then closed it. The hearing room had changed. It was no longer a performance space. It had become something quieter, something more permanent. Jasmine placed her hands on either side of her folder and closed it slowly. "That's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman." The chairman blinked twice, caught off guard by how suddenly the moment had shifted, how calm could devastate. Thank you, Congresswoman Crockett." He glanced around. Everyone was still watching her. Not him. Not Trump. Her. Outside the chamber, a staffer sent a single text to a national editor. She didn't raise her voice, but the room went silent anyway. The room never really regained its rhythm. Not after Jasmine Crockett spoke. Even as the next member launched into a pre-scripted question about tax disclosures and offshore holdings, the committee chamber still carried the echo of her final sentence. It's about whether a child's life was ever considered more than a demographic variable. That line had found its way into the margins of reporters' notebooks, their live blogs, their whispered summaries into miniature microphones. It became a refrain not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. And truth, when spoken without adornment, lingers longest. Trump sat quieter now, still forceful, still posturing, but something had cracked. His fingers no longer tapped the table. His knee no longer bounced. He kept looking over at Jasmine, then back to his counsel, then to the blank screen behind her as if waiting for something else to be revealed, as if wondering how much deeper it might go. And it would. Jasmine hadn't even started. By 3:26 p.m., the chairman called for her second round of questioning. There were 38 minutes left on the committee schedule. The room was restless. Everyone sensed there wasn't enough time to contain what might come next. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "Mr. Trump, you stated earlier that you weren't involved in specific case denials, that these decisions were made by staffers and agencies following standard protocol." Trump nodded slowly, then replied with a phrase he'd used dozens of times in his career. "That's how leadership works. You delegate." Jasmine opened another folder, yellow tab this time. "Then perhaps you can explain why your initials appear on a June 12, 2007 directive to expedite removal of Category 3 minors with compromised integration potential," with an attached note reading, quote, "Demographic balance is a national interest." She read the words evenly, no judgment, no emphasis. But the phrase itself sucked the air out of the room. compromised integration potential. It was clinical, cold, bureaucratic, and devastating. Trump blinked hard. His voice came back slower now. I don't write memos. People write things in my name all the time. That doesn't mean I saw it, let alone wrote it. Jasmine was already prepared for that. This particular directive, she said calmly, was hand-annotated, in blue ink matching your known signature style, authenticated by 3 forensic document specialists, and verified against your 2004 deposition handwriting from the Trump University case. Would you like me to display the side-by-side samples for the record? A murmur rippled through the room. Trump didn't respond. Jasmine looked to the chairman. Permission to enter Exhibits 14A through 14C into the record. So entered, the chairman said, barely masking the tension in his voice. She continued. This is not about prosecuting a refugee case, Mr. Trump. This is about the moral footprint of executive decisions. When the signature comes from the top, the consequences fall to the bottom. Then, gently, she reached for a transcript. Would you like me to read the intake statement from Danica's social worker, dated February 15, 2007? Trump shifted, this time noticeably. That's not relevant. None of this is relevant to this hearing. On the contrary, sir, it's central to the question of executive accountability. The committee is reviewing patterns of influence in life and death determinations. She paused, then read aloud. Danica P. stated, they told my mama we are not the right kind of people for America. I thought I was invisible because no one looks when we cry. The words didn't explode. They didn't need to. They sank, heavy, real. You could hear the hum of the lights above. Even the photographers had stopped shooting. Jasmine folded the transcript gently. She was 7. Trump's voice broke through louder, more aggressive now. This is all political theater. You want to score points? Go ahead. You want to cry over every unfortunate situation from 20 years ago? Fine. But don't pretend you care more about this country than I do. Don't pretend this is about truth. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She simply answered, Truth doesn't need theater, sir. Just daylight. She turned to the committee. I want to show the members something. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen behind her came alive with an Imagia photograph, color-faded but unmistakable. A young girl, standing barefoot outside a corrugated steel shelter. Mud caked to her calves, a plastic cup in her hand, her eyes looking into the lens like she knew she wouldn't be seen again. This was taken by a UN field volunteer in March of 2007. It is the last known photograph of Danica Pierre. No one moved. Then Jasmine pressed a button, and a second image appeared beside Ida's scan of the rejection memo bearing the signature DJT. Side by side, a face and a signature. No one in the room said a word. Trump sat very still. Then, finally, I didn't know. I never saw that. His voice was smaller now, not broken but no longer towering. Jasmine didn't reply with accusation. Instead, she turned her eyes to the room. That may be true, sir. That may very well be true. But when you sit in the seat that signs the papers, not knowing is still a choice. She closed the folder, then took out a letter. This came to my office 3 weeks ago. Handwritten, no return address. I verified its authenticity. She read slowly. Congresswoman Crockett, my name is Elsie Pierre. I was Danica's aunt. I raised her after her mother died in childbirth. I begged for her to be protected. They said no. I never knew who said no. I never knew where to send my anger. Now I do. I don't want revenge. I just wanted someone, someday, to say her name out loud in a room that mattered. Jasmine folded the letter in half, precisely. We are in that room. For the first time since he entered, Trump didn't have a response. He reached for a glass of water. His hand shook slightly. And Jasmine? She stayed seated. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Because she had done what few ever do in that room. She had made them listen. In the hallway outside, the media swarm was already building. But inside the chamber, Stillness reigned. The committee chair cleared his throat. "Congresswoman, you may proceed with your final statement." Jasmine looked at Trump, not to challenge, but to witness. "Mr. Trump, I don't know what you remember, and I'm not here to judge your memory, but I am here to remind this committee and the nation that a policy is only as human as the people it harms." She glanced again at the image on the screen, and Danica was human. No verdict was needed, no gavel required, because everyone in that room had already felt the verdict land. By 5:11 p.m., the hearing was technically over. The chairman had tapped the gavel twice, a procedural close. But no one stood. Not immediately. A few aides began gathering their binders. A reporter coughed. Someone knocked a pen off their table and didn't bother to pick it up. The room wasn't frozen. It was stunned, held in place not by rules, but by what had just happened. Donald Trump hadn't stormed out. He hadn't shouted. He simply sat there, eyes fixed on the photograph, still lingering on the screen. Danica, mud on her feet, a cup in her hand, a face too young to know what the word policy meant, but old enough to understand what it felt like to be unwanted. And beside her, his signature. Not forged, not rumored. His. Jasmine hadn't moved either. She was still at her seat, folders neatly stacked, her pen capped, her hands folded on the table in quiet symmetry. She hadn't changed expression since reading the letter from Elsie Pierre. And she wouldn't, not yet. Because this part wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. Down the hall, someone from MSNBC whispered into her phone. It's not that he didn't respond, it's that he couldn't. The moment finally broke when Trump's attorney leaned over, whispered something too soft for the microphones, and gently tapped his shoulder. Trump nodded. Slow, heavy. He rose. No flourish, no press wave. He walked out like a man not chased, but followed by something he couldn't outrun. 3 hours later, the clip aired on primetime. It wasn't the whole hearing. It wasn't even Jasmine's full 5 minutes. It was just that one line. But when you sit in the seat that signs the papers, not knowing is still a choice. It played on a loop in cable news, social media, late-night commentary, not because it was loud, not because it was angry, but because it couldn't be unheard. The next morning, a mural appeared in Brooklyn. Someone had painted Danica's image on the side of an abandoned building, the photo recreated in warm colors, her eyes looking directly at the street. Below it, in simple letters, "We see her now." By noon, the hashtag Danica was real was trending across every major platform. Some posted policy questions, others posted poems, but most just posted her name. Because sometimes the only justice left is remembering someone out loud. The White House issued no statement. Trump's team released a brief note claiming the documents were taken out of context and that immigration decisions are complicated. But it lacked force. Even his usual defenders on primetime cable danced around the segment. They called it overreach, theatrics, or old news. But they didn't deny it. They couldn't. The paperwork was real, and the photograph wasn't going anywhere. By Friday, something unexpected happened. 3 former DHS officials came forward. 2 testified anonymously. 1 went on record. There was pressure, one of them said on NPR. Unusual pressure. Not formal, not traceable, but real. Certain names, they were red flagged. Why? Because they didn't fit the demographic model. Those were the words. I remember them exactly. The hearings had been scheduled for 2 weeks of testimony, but the committee voted unanimously Democrats and Republicans to extend. Not because of politics, but because no one wanted to walk away yet. Not while Danica's eyes were still looking at them. As for Jasmine Crockett, she didn't do a press tour. She declined interviews. When CNN asked for a segment, she replied by email. I've already said what needed to be said. That room heard it. The country heard it. That's enough. She went back to her district, held a quiet community roundtable on immigration impact, sat with schoolteachers and volunteers, listened more than she spoke. Because she knew something Washington forgot too often. Truth doesn't need to be rebranded. It just needs to be left standing long enough. Weeks passed. The hearing footage became required viewing in some university ethics courses. A law school in Vermont launched a public archive dedicated to the unintended victims of executive discretion. They called it the Danica Project. It wasn't about blame. It was about naming. One Monday morning, Jasmine received a package in her office. No note. Inside was a photograph. It was hand-drawn. Danica again, this time smiling. In color, surrounded by wildflowers. On the back, a single sentence. Thank you for saying her name, where it could echo. Months later, Trump returned to testify in a different setting, civil litigation. He was louder that time. Defensive, dismissive, more like himself. But something was missing. The smirk didn't last as long. The eyes darted more often. Because once the silence has been broken, once the echo begins, it follows. You can't unsign a name. You can't unlook at a face. And you can't unspeak a truth said at the right time, in the right tone, by someone who came not to destroy, but to reveal. That's what Jasmine Crockett did. She didn't bury him in scandal. She didn't trap him in lies. She just opened the folder and let the record speak for itself. Danica's name now lives in a classroom in New Jersey, a mural in Oakland, a memorial plaque in a small church in Miami. No hashtags, no logos, just her name. A child once deemed not suitable, now seen fully. Because someone whispered, say her name out loud, in a room that matters. And someone did. Because this is the echo they can't escape. Not rage, not revenge. Just one irrefutable, irreversible sentence. Your initials were there, and so was she. There's a kind of silence that doesn't mean absence. It means presence, so strong, so honest. It fills the room without ever raising its voice. And maybe that's the kind of courage we need more of. Not the kind that stands on tables or points fingers, but the kind that sits still, opens a folder, and lets the truth breathe. Have you ever been in a room where you knew something no one else seemed to hear? Have you ever carried a story that didn't belong to you but still wouldn't let you sleep? Because maybe it's not about being loud. Maybe it's about knowing when to speak, and why. Let this story remind you, you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to believe that someone's silence matters enough to break your own. If this moment moved you, even just a little, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep bringing forward stories that deserve a seat at the table. Leave us a comment. Share how this landed with you. And if you know someone who's been quietly holding something too long, maybe send this their way. We'll be back soon with another chapter of dignity, reckoning, and quiet power. But until then, remember what Jasmine said, not to win, but to witness. When you sit in the seat that signs the papers, not knowing is still a choice. We'll see you in the next story. Stay tuned.